Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. The vaccines against coronavirus were developed with incredible speed, but the rollout has been rocky. In a minute, KUOW's Anna Boiko-Weyrauch will explain why. First, let's get you caught up. 9 out of 10 Washington state Congress members agree President Trump deserved to be impeached for inciting last week's Capitol insurrection. Republicans Jamie Herrera Butler of Vancouver and Dan Newhouse of Yakima joined the state's Democrats in voting yes on Wednesday. The lone holdout was Republican Kathy McMorris Rogers of Spokane, who said she didn't believe Trump incited violence and called the process rushed. An unusual number of songbirds showing up dead in backyards around King County has state wildlife officials asking you to take down the feeder if you have one. Pine siskins and other finches are dying from salmonella poisoning, which can spread more easily when the birds flock together around feeders. It's also not helping that there are more of them around, thanks to a phenomenon where birds that usually hang out in Canada during the winter migrate farther south than usual. Fish and Wildlife is asking you to stop outdoor feeding until at least the end of the month or clean your feeder daily. And if you've been listening to the rain every night and thinking we've been getting a lot more than usual, you are not wrong. The National Weather Service says that as of yesterday, Seattle got 20% of its usual annual rainfall in just 13 days. No other Seattle January has come close to being this wet since the motion picture was invented more than 125 years ago. Forecast says it'll be back to the usual drizzle over the next few days. It's been a few weeks since Washington got its first shipment of COVID vaccines. The excitement was palpable, but things have not gone as planned. Many healthcare workers are still waiting to get their first dose, and we're not sure how or when people outside of the highest risk groups will be able to get a vaccine. KUOW's Anna Boiko-Weyrauch is here to explain what's going on. Hey, Anna.
Hello, Trish.
Oh, good to see your face. The state has had a whole plan for who gets vaccinated when. Remind us where we are in that list.
Okay, so we are in phase 1A, and that covers people who work in healthcare settings or live or work in places like nursing homes, assisted living, adult family homes. This is still the first of the first groups.
Okay. So how are those people actually getting a shot in the arm? What does that process look like?
So it really depends on who you are. So, for example, healthcare workers. If you work at a hospital that has doses, you make an appointment, you come in, bada bing, bada boom, you get the shot. Let's say you're a healthcare worker, but the place you work doesn't have the vaccine. You're at a small clinic, you're at a dental office. Then you have to figure out, well, how can you get in? How can you actually secure an appointment, get a dose? You know, this represents one delay in the process. There's this sort of matchmaking. It's a whole different process for long-term care facilities. So those are, senior living homes, nursing homes, assisted living facilities. And a lot of them are still waiting for their date to get vaccinated. They are working with a pharmacy. It could be their local pharmacy, or they could be partnering through this federal partnership with CVS and Walgreens. And so they have to wait for CVS and Walgreens to call them up, say, hey, can we come in? And then those pharmacists come in and vaccinate the residents. And they've done a small fraction of those facilities in the state, and there are hundreds more facilities left.
This sounds complicated and confusing. One thing we do know, though, is that the state has gotten more than 600,000 doses so far. A lot of them are sitting in storage right now. About 30%, I think, have actually been given. What is getting in the way of delivering them to people?
Right. So as we talked about, the complexity of this system, really the only straightforward thing about this process is jabbing somebody in the arm. Before that, after that, there's a lot that you have to sort through. So I'll walk you through some challenges. Number one, the flow of the vaccine supply and the planning. For example, hospitals don't have a lot of lead time about how many doses they're getting when. The state actually doesn't have a lot of lead time of how many doses we're getting. And so it's hard to plan if you don't know exactly what's coming in. Which leads me to the next logistical challenge, which is scheduling. So if you're a hospital, you don't want to schedule people and then have the doses fall through. Cassie Sauer is the CEO of the Washington State Hospital Association, and she shared a story recently of a hospital where that happened and this last-minute scramble that ensued.
The hospital in Olympia, Capital Medical Center, had vaccine clinics starting on New Year's Day at 7 a.m., and they had 100 people signed up, and they had no vaccine. So MultiCare offered to give them vaccine New Year's Eve late, and I think they drove it down there like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So they could start their vaccine clinic the next day. So there's worry about getting a whole bunch of people signed up for something if you don't have supplies.
And Sauer also talked about all the work that hospitals have to do around giving one dose. So there's scheduling, and then there's also a lot of extra paperwork.
If it was a single dose vaccine, it would be easier. But since you for sure need to get the person's information, record very carefully what day they received the vaccine, which vaccine they received, make sure you're not mixing Pfizer and Moderna. The record keeping is super important.
Right. What we're hearing, though, is that this is unprecedented and we're dealing with a government process here. Sounds like what the upshot is.
This is complicated. We are dealing with a government process on top of a fractured healthcare system, which is not one system, but many different players in a system. And we're saying the people who are getting this vaccine first are people in that system, which is not one system. So we have to get coordination among a system that may not necessarily be coordinated.
Okay, so that we know that this is difficult right now. Is there any indication that we could reach a point where things might start to be more smooth?
Certainly. So all that said, the pace is picking up. Week over week, more doses are going into more arms than the week before. Looking just at King County, New Year's Eve, on average, about 3,000 doses were administered per day. 10 days later, that number was up more than 30%. Now, that's an improvement, but we need to vaccinate 4 times that number every day for King County to reach a good level of immunity. And we're going to really have to switch up this system and use different methods. Otherwise, it would take years.
You said this was a fractured healthcare system. What indication do you have that anything might change? Are we going to get better at this because we need to?
Oh, yeah. And actually, we already have a model for a way to get better at this, and that's COVID testing. That there were these big gaps in the system. We weren't getting enough tests, and so you had these local authorities who were sort of standing up their own things. And so right now, what you already see is you have local, state, and even national officials are floating ways to speed this up. So, for example, last week, Payne Field, the airport in Everett, and this week at Edmonds Community College, they have mass vaccination sites. Snohomish County shared a video of this mass vaccination clinic that they're starting in Payne Field, and it's people driving up in their cars, rolling up their sleeves, and like you see an injection and there's an airplane in the distance. This week, the Swedish healthcare system is launching a mass vaccination clinic. In a couple weeks, we're going to have 2 vaccination sites scheduled to open in King County, in South King County. The county's also talking about working with employers and community centers to create pop-up vaccination clinics. And in Seattle, they're also talking about potential locations for mass vaccination sites. One of the COVID testing sites might become sort of a hybrid site and also be able to vaccinate people.
Midsummer was supposed to be the rough estimate for when everyone would be vaccinated if they wanted to be. Should this slow rollout change our expectations for that timeline?
I have a hunch that yes, it should, just given how things have rolled out so far. Now, there are a couple other things at play that we haven't talked about, and that's that right now we have 2 authorized vaccines, but by end of the spring, we might have 5 total. We already saw when the Moderna vaccine was approved, we got a huge bump in doses, in the number of doses we were able to get. So as we see potentially more vaccines being evaluated, and if those get approved, we could see the supply increase a lot. And that could change things too. I am just going to continue my own personal strategy of taking one day at a time. Every day, one day at a time.
Wise words. KUOW's Anna Boiko-Weyrauch has been covering vaccines since the rollout. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.